Conor McGregor vs. Eddie Alvarez, UFC 205, a night for the ages. It was a crisp November night in 2016, and Madison Square Garden, the mecca of boxing, had just opened its doors to the UFC for the first time. The city that never sleeps buzzed with the anticipation of history being made, for on this night, Conor McGregor, the brash Irishman with a gift for gab and a razor-sharp left hand, was about to attempt something no fighter had ever done before. He was aiming to make history by becoming the first fighter in UFC history to hold two belts simultaneously, the featherweight and lightweight championships. But standing across from him was a seasoned and tough fighter, a man who had seen the highs and lows of mixed martial arts, Eddie Alvarez. The Philadelphia native, known for his gritty fighting style and knockout power, was ready to defend his lightweight title with everything he had. This fight wasn't just a clash of two men, it was a battle of contrasting worlds. McGregor, the trash-talking showman who had taken the MMA world by storm, and Alvarez, the hard-nosed warrior who had earned his reputation the hard way. The rise of Conor McGregor. To understand the magnitude of this fight, we must first take a trip down memory lane and explore Conor McGregor's meteoric rise to superstardom. In a sport dominated by grit, sweat, and determination, McGregor seemed to break the mold. His rise was fast, loud, and, at times, controversial. From the humble beginnings of the Dublin suburbs to the unforgiving world of MMA, McGregor's personality shone through. His outspokenness and confidence turned heads, and his performances in the cage backed up every word. By 2015, Conor McGregor was the UFC featherweight champion, having dismantled Josh Aldo in 13 seconds to claim the title. A feat so quick, it left the MMA world in shock. But McGregor wasn't satisfied. No, he wasn't content being just a champion. He had bigger plans. His sights were set on the lightweight title, and Eddie Alvarez, the man who had recently captured that very belt, would be his next target. The journey of Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez, on the other hand, was no stranger to adversity. Born in the rough neighborhoods of Philadelphia, Eddie had fought his way to the top through sheer will and perseverance. His journey through promotions like Bellator, where he was a two-time lightweight champion, had proven his pedigree. By the time he entered the UFC in 2014, Alvarez had already been tested against the best in the world. His gritty style, a mixture of hard punches, relentless pressure, and wrestling, had earned him the respect of both fans and opponents alike. When Alvarez finally captured the UFC lightweight championship by defeating Rafael dos Anjos in July 2016, the veteran knew that his toughest challenge was still ahead of him. His opponent, Conor McGregor, was more than just a fighter, he was a force of nature. And the pressure on Alvarez was immense. Not only was he facing a man with a history of making history, but McGregor's words, his trash talk, and his aura were beginning to get into his head. Still, Eddie was no stranger to mental warfare. He knew how to withstand pressure. He had done it before and would do it again. But deep down, he knew this fight would define his legacy. The build-up, a clash of worlds. The build-up to UFC 205 was nothing short of electric. McGregor, the master of the mind game, used every opportunity to get under the skin of Eddie Alvarez. The Irishman's presence was larger than life. Whether it was his relentless trash talk or his unforgettable moments at press conferences, Conor made it clear that he wasn't just there to fight. He was there to break records and create legacies. Eddie, on the other hand, kept his cool. He wasn't the type to engage in mind games. He focused on his training, on refining his skills, and on being ready for the challenge ahead. But McGregor was relentless, taunting him at every opportunity. He was at it again at the press conferences, calling Alvarez a chump and telling him that he would eat him alive. The verbal jabs flew fast, and the tension between the two grew palpable. Alvarez, however, was determined not to let McGregor's mind games break him. In interviews, Conor would smile, almost gloating, as he would say things like, "I'm going to be the first fighter to hold 2 titles. This is a new era, and you're just lucky to be here." Meanwhile, Eddie stayed humble, focusing on the fight itself, but there was no denying that the mind games were beginning to take their toll. The world watched as McGregor, ever the showman, promised a knockout. He'd never backed down from a bold statement before, and he wasn't about to start now. The fight, a masterclass from McGregor. The night finally arrived. November 12, 2016. UFC 205 at Madison Square Garden. The atmosphere was electric, and the stakes were higher than ever. As the lights dimmed and the crowd roared, the 2 men made their way to the Octagon. Alvarez, with his heavy hands and wrestling base, entered the cage with the confidence of a seasoned champion. McGregor, with his signature walk, was the epitome of focus, ready to prove that he was indeed the greatest showman MMA had ever seen. The bell rang, and the fight began. The first round was a tense one. Alvarez, as expected, came out aggressive. He tried to close the distance, pressuring McGregor with his boxing and clinch game. McGregor, however, was elusive. He used his footwork, his reach, and his precision to avoid the heavy shots while landing his own with surgical accuracy. Alvarez managed to land a few punches, but McGregor was in control. His counter-striking was on point, and he made Alvarez pay for every mistake. You could see the doubt begin to creep into Eddie's mind, but it was in the second round where McGregor truly shone. He had Alvarez figured out. A clean left hand rocked Alvarez early in the round, and the crowd went wild. Eddie was hurt, but he tried to recover. McGregor, sensing blood, turned on the heat. A barrage of punches followed, and Alvarez was on the back foot. Conor's confidence grew with each strike. It was the type of performance that made you realize just how far ahead McGregor was in terms of timing and precision. A few moments later, the fight was over. McGregor landed a clean left hand that dropped Alvarez to the canvas. The referee stepped in to stop the fight, and McGregor had done it. He had made history. The aftermath, controversies, and reaction. As the dust settled and McGregor stood in the center of the octagon, both belts in hand, history was made. He had achieved what no fighter before him had ever done: hold 2 titles simultaneously. The crowd erupted in cheers, and McGregor's victory speech became one for the ages. But even in the aftermath of McGregor's triumph, there were some controversies. Alvarez, ever the professional, claimed he was out of his element in the fight, acknowledging that McGregor's speed and precision were too much for him. He later admitted that the mental warfare had played a bigger role in the fight than he had initially realized. Many fighters speculated that Alvarez had been psychologically beaten before he even stepped into the cage. On the other hand, McGregor's victory was seen as the dawn of a new era in MMA. But there were those who questioned the legitimacy of his success, pointing out that Alvarez wasn't seen as a dominant champion, and the fight was heavily stacked in McGregor's favor. Nonetheless, McGregor's reign as the first dual title holder would go on to change the course of UFC history. He became the face of MMA and his accomplishments in the sport would forever be remembered. Conclusion: The Legend of McGregor and Alvarez. Conor McGregor vs. Eddie Alvarez wasn't just a fight. It was a story of two men from different worlds colliding in the biggest stage of them all. It was the culmination of McGregor's rise to superstardom and the culmination of Alvarez's long, hard-fought journey to the top. While McGregor stood victorious, the fight was a testament to the heart and toughness of Eddie Alvarez. The night would go down as one of the most historic moments in UFC history, with McGregor cementing his place as one of the greatest fighters to ever step into the cage. And as for the future, Conor McGregor would go on to achieve even greater heights. But the legacy of that night, the night he became the first fighter to hold two UFC titles simultaneously, would never fade.